It was the kind of evening that made the entire city turn its gaze toward one place, the Cross Foundation Gala. Every year it was whispered about, in glossy magazines and across news channels, a night where the wealthiest families displayed their power under chandeliers that had seen generations of kings and queens. The mansion itself sat on a rise above the city, its tall windows glowing against the winter dark, a beacon of influence and untouchable wealth. Guests arrived in black limousines that glided one after another to the stone entrance, each door opening to reveal gowns stitched with diamonds and men in tuxedos tailored in Milan. Photographers flashed bulbs like bursts of lightning, capturing the cascade of wealth, as if each moment were history. Inside the grand hall, the air vibrated with the music of a live jazz band. The saxophone curled around laughter, the piano tinkled beneath conversations about mergers and politics. Waiters in crisp white jackets drifted between the crowd with silver trays, glasses of champagne, sparkling like liquid gold. The chandeliers overhead spilled light across the marble floor, their crystal drops catching the shine of each gem worn by the guests. It was a living painting of opulence, a stage set for ambition. At the center of this carefully constructed scene stood Ethan Cross. 34 years old, the heir who had built his own fortune before even touching his inheritance. His dark hair gleamed under the lights, his tuxedo flawless. His shoes polished so well they mirrored the room. His jawline was sharp, his shoulders straight, and his posture carried the unmistakable air of someone used to commanding attention. Yet his eyes told another story. They were distant gray like steel, watching the room with the detachment of a man who had seen every performance before and no longer cared for the show. He shook hands, he nodded at senators, he offered quiet responses to executives, but there was no warmth in his expression. He was a man fulfilling an obligation, not enjoying an evening. Around him swirled the elite, but he stood as though in a cage, made of glass, unreachable even when surrounded. And then the camera of the night seemed to shift. Amid the cascade of silks and diamonds, a figure entered who did not belong. Anna was 22. She wore a dress that had been altered twice, to fit once when her cousin lent it to her, and again when she pinned it herself in a mirror before daring to step into this world. It was not designer, it was not new, but it was clean and understated, and on her it became something quietly radiant. Her hair brushed simply caught the light when she moved. Her eyes were wide with the strain of courage. She stepped across the marble floor as though each movement might expose her, yet her spine remained straight. Every detail of her presence carried both fragility and defiance. Some guests glanced at her with curiosity, some with dismissal. She did not have the glitter of the others, no necklace dripping pearls, no perfume from Paris, but she had something different, a kind of raw honesty that stood out even more sharply in a room soaked in artifice. The music shifted to a brighter note. Laughter spiked across the hall, and Anna paused at the edge of the crowd. She was alone in a sea of alliances. The camera of imagination might have followed the golden shimmer of gowns, but instead it found her standing still. Her breath caught her hands gripping the clutch that held nothing but determination. Ethan noticed her then. His glance had skimmed across hundreds of faces, dismissing them as pieces of the same puzzle. But when his gaze brushed over Anna, something happened. The air seemed to still, the noise of the gala dulled for a heartbeat. His gray eyes lingered, They should have passed over her, as they had passed over everyone else. She was not dressed to impress. She was not introduced with pedigree. She carried no aura of power. Yet the very fact that she was different held him. The chandelier light caught the curve of her cheek, the line of her neck, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. And suddenly, the camera of the night slowed. It was cinematic, as if the frame narrowed until there were only two people in a crowd of hundreds. Anna, caught in her own fear, felt it too. She lifted her chin, though her pulse hammered. Their eyes locked. In that moment, nothing was spoken, but the story began. Anna had not walked into that mansion by accident. Nothing about her presence at the Cross Foundation Gala was coincidence. The invitation had not been hers. It had been slipped into her hands by the one person powerful enough to make her both grateful and terrified, Veronica Cross-Ethan's mother. Veronica had spoken in her sharp, measured tone. When they met a week before, the kind of tone that made every syllable sound like law. She had promised Anna relief from the crushing hospital bills that were strangling her family, the kind of relief Anna had begged for in every bank office and charity desk, but never received. All she needed to do in return was attend this gala and make herself known to Ethan. The words had been simple. Appear, attract, let him see you. The rest would fall into place. Anna had understood perfectly. She was not being offered a chance at romance. She was being turned into an arrangement. But when your father's life depends on machines that hum only as long as the payments are made, when your mother sits in a chair each night, staring at unpaid bills as though staring at a coffin, you stop thinking about dignity and start thinking about survival. So Anna had taken the dress from her cousin's closet, stitched it by hand until it barely fit her frame, and rehearsed in the mirror how not to tremble when standing among the rich. She had practiced her smile, but the mirror had not prepared her for the grandeur of the Cross Mansion. As the night spun forward, she told herself again and again that this was a plan, not a dream. She had to move carefully, like a pawn on a chessboard, each step calculated. The gala swirled with laughter and champagne, with couples twirling in gowns worth more than her house, with conversations about numbers that could have erased her family's debts in an instant. She lingered at the edge, trying to blend in, but knowing she never truly could. Then the moment came when Veronica made her move. The orchestra shifted, the lights dimmed just slightly, and the band leader announced a tango. The air itself seemed to tighten. Veronica's hand touched Anna's shoulder, a guiding pressure that felt less like kindness and more like command. "Go," she murmured, and suddenly Anna was being ushered forward. She wanted to refuse, but the room tilted, and she found herself on the dance floor paired with a man she did not know, a guest of the evening. The first notes of the tango cut the air like silk, and Anna's body remembered something she had not felt in years. She had once taken lessons in a community hall when she was a girl, when life had still allowed small luxuries like music and movement. Those lessons had ended when bills had piled too high, but the rhythm had never left her bones. Now, under the glitter of chandeliers, her body flowed with instinct. She moved with a grace that startled even herself. The guests who had barely noticed her before began to turn their heads. Her borrowed dress swayed her steps, precise but alive. Her eyes focused as she pivoted and turned. She was not dazzling because of jewels or designer fabric. She was dazzling because for the first time all night She was not pretending. She was simply moving, and it was beautiful. Ethan noticed. He had been standing near the orchestra, a glass untouched in his hand, half listening to a senator boast about new investments. But his eyes had been drifting bored and restless until they caught sight of her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the lights. But as she spun, as she caught the music and bent it into grace, he felt something shift. This was not the rehearsed charm of the women he knew, not the calculated seduction of socialites. This was raw, honest movement, something too pure to be staged. His chest tightened, and for the first time that night, he truly watched. The camera of the moment seemed to zoom in. Around her, the room blurred faces faded, and Anna became the only point of focus. She felt his gaze like heat against her skin. It unsettled her, but it also gave her strength. She knew she had caught his attention, and that had been the plan all along. Yet she had not expected it to feel like this, not expected his eyes to burn into her with something closer to wonder than desire. When the song ended, the applause rippled through the room. Anna's cheeks were flushed, her breath fast. She stepped back, bowing slightly, trying not to stumble. The man she had danced with smiled and released her, but Anna barely noticed. She lifted her head, and across the room she saw Ethan standing still among the restless crowd, his gaze locked on hers. The connection lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Her plan had succeeded. He had seen her. Veronica's lips curved in a cold, satisfied smile. From where she stood at the edge, as if checking a box on a list. Anna's stomach turned, but she forced herself to stand tall. This was what she had come for. For the rest of the night, she remained careful. She drifted through the crowd, spoke little, stayed within sight of Veronica's cold watch. But she knew the seed had been planted. Ethan Cross had looked at her, and nothing could erase that moment. Later, as the gala wound down, Anna lingered heart-pounding with the dread of what came next. She was still just a pawn in a game she did not fully understand. But pawns sometimes cross the board. Pawns sometimes change the game. The gala thinned slowly, like a tide retreating from the shore. Cars lined up at the entrance once more. Chauffeurs opened doors. Laughter drifted out into the night as jeweled guests departed for their penthouses and private jets. The orchestra packed away their instruments. Waiters cleared half-emptied glasses, and the chandeliers above seemed dimmer. Their brilliance softened now that the performance was over. For most, the night had been nothing more than another chapter in a book of endless luxury. But for Anna, the night was only beginning. She lingered near the back corridor, her clutch clutched tightly, her palms damp. She was supposed to leave with the others fade back into invisibility, but Veronica's instructions had been clear. Do not leave until I say. And so she waited, her stomach knotting tighter with every minute that passed. The marble floors no longer echoed with conversation, only with the footsteps of staff. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan disappeared into the library, a space reserved for him alone. Anna saw it happen, a glimpse of him, breaking away from the last of the dignitaries, his broad shoulders, slipping past the archway into shadow. She should have turned toward the exit, then should have fled while she still had the chance. But before she could, a hand closed gently but firmly on her arm. It was the Cross family's senior butler, his face unreadable, his voice low. Mr. Cross's mother asked that you stay behind. He guided her through the corridor, his touch polite but unyielding. Anna's heart pounded. Each step felt like a choice, stolen from her each door. They passed like another chance she had failed to take. She had wanted to catch Ethan's eye, yes, but she had not expected to be pulled deeper so soon. At the end of the hall, the butler opened the library door. The room glowed with firelight. Shelves of dark oak rose high, filled with volumes that smelled faintly of leather and dust. A decanter of scotch rested on a side table, crystal glasses gleaming faintly in the golden light. And in the center, leaning against the mantel, stood Ethan. He had discarded his bow tie, his jacket rested carelessly on the back of a chair, and the first 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, exposing the strong line of his throat. His posture was one of ease, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the doorway, as though he had been expecting someone. When his gaze landed on Anna, it narrowed slightly, as if trying to place her in a puzzle that had not yet revealed its image. The butler released her arm and withdrew the door, closing softly behind. The sound echoed like a seal, final and inescapable. Now the room belonged only to the 2 of them. Anna stood still, her breath caught the warmth of the fire, wrapping around her, while the weight of his stare pressed against her skin. She had dreamed of moments like this, in abstract, the kind of moment where a poor girl finds herself alone, with a man whose name headlines magazines. But the reality was nothing like the fantasy. Her throat tightened, her chest felt too small. Ethan did not speak immediately. He crossed to the table, poured himself a glass of scotch, and set it down without drinking. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though he were trying to control the air itself. Finally, his voice cut through the silence, deep and measured. "You stayed late." Anna's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to explain, to invent some excuse, but the truth clung to her tongue like lead. She managed only a faint nod, her fingers tightening on the fabric of her dress. Ethan studied her, his gaze tracing her from head to toe, not with lust but with calculation. He was a man used to lies and disguises, a man who had learned to see through masks. And Anna's mask was fragile, slipping with every second. She shifted her weight, the firelight dancing across her features, revealing the nervous tremor in her stance. For a brief instant, she thought she saw something soften in his expression, a flicker of curiosity. He pushed off the mantle, walked closer, the floorboards quiet under his steps. Anna's pulse quickened. She felt cornered, not by the room, but by the inevitability of the moment. She was here because someone had placed her here, because a deal had been struck without her soul's consent. She thought of her father in the hospital machines, beeping her mother counting coins at the kitchen table. She thought of the bills stacked like walls around her, and she knew she could not back away now. Ethan stopped a few feet from her, his height casting a shadow across her face. His eyes met hers searching. He tilted his head slightly, as though waiting for her to explain herself. Anna opened her mouth, drew in a breath, and felt the words trembling on the edge of her lips. The fire crackled louder, the air thickened, and in that moment, everything narrowed to just him. Just her and the secret that hovered between them, about to break. Anna's lips trembled as she searched for the courage to speak. The silence of the library pressed against her like the weight of the world. The fire snapped, throwing sparks into the air, the glow casting Ethan's face in gold and shadow. His eyes were steady on hers, patient yet piercing, as though he could wait all night for the truth she was too afraid to give. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat screaming of her father in the hospital, of the bills that suffocated her family, of the bargain she had accepted because there was no other choice. She swallowed hard and stepped closer, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. She drew in a shaky breath and forced the words out, her voice cracking, yet clear, desperate, yet stripped of any disguise. "I can serve you any time you want." The air itself seemed to freeze. Ethan's brows furrowed his body, going utterly still. The words hung between them, fragile and heavy, echoing in the space, as though the shelves of books had heard a confession meant only for him. He stared at her, not blinking, not moving his jaw, tightening as though the phrase had struck him somewhere deeper than flesh. Anna stood trembling, her chin lifted in defiance, though her body screamed with fear. She had said it. She had carried out the instruction she had been given. But it did not feel like survival. It felt like betrayal of herself. Ethan's gaze dropped to her hands clenched so tightly, her knuckles whitened, then lifted again to her eyes. What he saw there was not seduction. It was not confidence or flirtation. It was desperation, raw, unhidden, burning like a secret candle behind her pupils. He took one step closer, not in desire but in disbelief. His voice came low, almost a growl. "What did you just say?" Anna flinched, the courage that had carried her this far faltering under the weight of his tone. Her lips moved, repeating the sentence, because she had no other words, because she had been told it was all she needed to say. "I can serve you any time you want." This time, the whisper was even smaller, breaking on the last syllable. Ethan's eyes darkened, confusion mingling with something sharper. He had been propositioned before countless times by women with ambition and beauty and charm. But this was different. This was wrong. She did not look at him like a man she wanted. She looked at him like a sentence she was forced to speak, like a line she had been rehearsed into. His chest rose and fell as he stepped back, as though trying to distance himself from a trap he could not yet see. He studied her face, the trembling of her lower lip, the flush across her cheeks, the glassy film of unshed tears. And then he saw it in her eyes, the smallest flicker, like a signal buried under layers of fear. "Help me." Ethan's throat tightened. Something inside him twisted, an old wound reopening. He remembered being younger, cornered by expectations, by the sharp voice of his mother dictating every move he could or could not make. He remembered the hollow feeling of being used, of being stripped of choice. And now here stood a girl half broken, repeating words that sounded rehearsed, words that tasted of someone else's control. His anger flared not at her, but at the invisible hand that had pushed her here. The fire cracked louder, its light flashing across his sharp features. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, searching her face. "Who told you to say that?" Anna's breath hitched, her chest heaved as if the question itself threatened to tear the secret from her. She shook her head quickly, her hair brushing against her cheeks. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him, like a bird trapped in a cage, afraid of both staying and flying. Ethan's jaw clenched. He reached up not to touch her, but to run his hand across his own mouth as though steadying himself. He could not look away from her. Her presence was fragile yet magnetic, her words shattering the composure he had perfected over years. In that moment, he did not see a girl offering herself. He saw a girl begging for air while drowning in silence. Anna felt the weight of his stare, and for the first time since she had entered the room, she realized he was not the monster in this story. Her throat tightened. She had spoken the words because she believed he wanted them. But the way he recoiled, the way his eyes burned with both fury and disbelief, told her the truth she had not dared to hope for. He was not the one who had demanded this. He was not the one who had written the deal. The realization cracked something inside, her fragile hope flickering to life. Still the silence pressed down. Her whisper hung between them. The fire popped, and Ethan's expression hardened as though he had reached the edge of patience. He straightened, broad shoulders squared, and his voice came again, low and steady, carrying both warning and promise. "Tell me who put those words in your mouth." Anna froze under the intensity of Ethan's voice, the firelight trembling across her face, as though exposing every secret she wanted to bury. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her throat locked her heart, hammering so loudly. She feared he could hear it. Ethan took one measured step closer, his shadow falling over her slight frame, his eyes demanding the truth. For a moment she thought of lying, of inventing something, but the weight of his stare made falsehood impossible. She lowered her gaze, lips pressed tight, her silence answering more than any words. Ethan's jaw tightened his chest, rising and falling with restrained fury. He reached past her and shut the door fully, the quiet click echoing like a verdict. When he spoke again, his voice was low but sharp, every syllable carved with authority. "You will not stand here in my house and feed me rehearsed lines. Tell me who told you to say that." Anna's eyes filled her voice barely audible. "I thought it was what you wanted." His brow furrowed confusion, flashing into disbelief. "Who told you that?" Her silence stretched again, and then it broke not by her, but by the sound of heels against polished wood. The door opened without a knock, and in swept Veronica Cross, elegant in a gown the color of midnight, her diamonds catching the firelight as though she carried her own constellation. She paused at the threshold, her gaze sweeping across the room, landing on Anna, then on her son. A small smile curved her lips, cold, controlled, victorious. "She's here because I arranged it," Veronica said, her tone casual, as if explaining a simple dinner seating. "You need discipline, Ethan. You need someone to remind you of your duties, not just your whims." Ethan's entire body stiffened, his eyes snapping to his mother, fury igniting in the stormy gray depths. His voice was a razor. "You did this." Veronica stepped inside, closing the door with a soft push. Her movements were precise, graceful, calculated. "Of course I did," she replied. "You have been drifting, Ethan, lost in your illusions of independence. I will not allow the empire your father built to crumble, because his son prefers solitude over alliances. Anna is here to serve a purpose." Anna's heart clenched. Every word from Veronica's lips confirmed what she had feared. She was not a guest. She was not a choice. She was an arrangement. A pawn moved into place on a board far larger than herself. She stepped back, the heat of shame flooding her cheeks, her hands trembling as she clutched the fabric of her dress. Ethan turned to her, his voice firm but softer, as if trying to pull her back from the edge of collapse. "Did she tell you I wanted this?" Anna's lips parted, her breath shaky, and she nodded once barely. The fury in Ethan's chest erupted. He swung his gaze back to his mother, his voice raised now, echoing against the walls. "How dare you?" Veronica did not flinch. She glided forward, her heels clicking like punctuation. her eyes never leaving his. "Do not speak to me as though you are still a child, Ethan. You are a man with responsibilities, and I will see that you fulfill them. This girl has debts, desperation, and the right look. She is willing to do what is required. That is all you need." Anna's knees weakened, the cruelty in the words piercing deeper than any knife. She had never felt so naked, so diminished. Her chest rose with a strangled sob she tried to hide. Ethan moved instantly, his hand lifting as though to shield her from his mother's gaze. "Enough." His voice thundered raw and unrestrained. "Enough of this. You do not decide who belongs in my life. You do not buy people like objects." Veronica's smile did not falter, though her eyes sharpened with steel. "You are naive if you think life is about choice, Ethan. Power is built on arrangements, on sacrifices. Your father understood that. Anna is nothing more than an investment." Anna staggered back, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Every word branded her as less than human, as a tool to be used and discarded. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body betrayed her, frozen by fear and humiliation. Ethan stepped in front of her fully, now his broad frame, shielding her from Veronica's line of sight. His voice dropped, controlled but lethal. "I will not let you use her, not her." Veronica's brow arched, her amusement tinged with disdain. "You speak as if you feel something for this girl. She is beneath you, Ethan. She does not belong in this world." Ethan's reply came like thunder. "Maybe she is the only thing real in this world." The room went silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Anna stared at his back, her tears slowing her breath, catching on the weight of his defense. No one had ever spoken for her like that, not against power like this. Veronica studied her son for a long moment, her lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You will regret this." She turned her heels, striking the floor like a drumbeat of war, and swept out of the room, leaving the door half open in her wake. The silence she left behind was heavy, filled with the echo of her control and the defiance that had just cracked it. Ethan turned back to Anna, his expression softening as his eyes met hers. She shook her head, whispering through her tears, "I was never supposed to be here." His hand hovered near her arm, not touching, just present. "You should never have been put here," he said. His voice was rough, weighted with guilt and fury. "But you are not upon Anna, not to me." For the first time since she had entered the mansion, Anna let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was more than the deal that had chained her. The house fell into an uneasy silence after Veronica's departure, the echo of her words still poisoning the air like smoke that refused to clear. Anna stood trembling near the hearth, her hands gripping the folds of her borrowed dress. So tightly her knuckles whitened her body, rigid as though bracing for another blow that never came. Ethan remained a step away, his eyes on her, torn between the fury that still burned in his chest and the ache of seeing her unravel in front of him. She turned away sharply, walking toward the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, as though the night beyond might swallow her whole. Her voice was hoarse, jagged with shame. "Do you see now? I was never meant to be more than a deal. My father is dying, the bills are crushing us, and your mother knew it. She found me. She told me there was one way to save him, one way to keep my family from losing everything." Her words spilled in broken fragments, each one tearing something open in Ethan's chest. She pressed her eyes shut, tears sliding down her cheeks, her voice dropping to a whisper. I told myself I could endure anything if it meant saving him, that I could trade myself like a coin if it meant buying one more month, one more chance. But standing here, hearing her call me nothing, I realize maybe I already am nothing. Ethan's steps were slow but deliberate as he crossed the room, his hand lifting but hesitating just before it touched her shoulder. He forced his voice low steady, though it shook with restrained emotion. "You are not nothing. Do not ever believe that." She turned, then her eyes wild with grief, her lips trembling. "What am I then? A girl with debts so deep she has to sell herself to men like you. A daughter who cannot fix her father's pain except by sacrificing her own." Her words struck like shards of glass, but he did not retreat. Instead, his mind snapped back to another night long ago, when he had been a boy, standing in a darkened hall as his father's coffin was lowered into the ground, when Veronica's cold hand had gripped his shoulder and whispered that grief was weakness, that survival meant never letting anyone close enough to hurt you again. He saw himself in her pain, the same loneliness, the same suffocating weight of being forced into choices like one should ever face. Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair opposite her, as if grounding them both. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice rougher now. "When my father died, I thought I would never breathe again. My mother told me it was my duty to step into his shadow, to keep the empire alive. I was 15, and she was already teaching me how to wield people like tools." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Every woman I cared for, she destroyed. Every friendship poisoned. She only taught me that love was liability, and for years I believed her." Anna blinked, startled, her sobs easing into quiet gasps. She had not expected him to bear his wounds, not when he wore armor so thick the world saw only steel. His eyes lifted to hers, haunted yet unflinching. "You think you are alone in being used, Anna, but you are not. My life has been one long negotiation of ownership of control, and I swore I would never let her win again." His words hung in the dim glow of the firelight, fragile but undeniable. Anna sank into the window seat, her hands curling into her lap, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. For the first time, she felt less like a pawn and more like an echo of something he carried too. Yet the shame clung to her, the weight of her choices suffocating. Her voice trembled as she said, "I wanted to hate you when she told me what the deal was. I wanted to despise you, to believe you were just another cruel man who saw me as currency. But then I saw you tonight, standing alone in that ballroom, watching the world, as though it belonged to you but never letting it touch you. And I thought maybe you were as trapped as I was." A tear slid down her cheek as she added, "I did not expect you to defend me. No one ever does." Ethan's chest tightened, his hand finally reaching out to brush a tear from her face. The gesture was small, careful, almost reverent, as if he feared she might break. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You deserved someone to defend you long before tonight." She drew in a shuddering breath, her body leaning almost imperceptibly into his hand, before she pulled back, ashamed of the comfort she craved. She turned her face away, staring at the storm clouds gathering beyond the glass. You should hate me for being weak enough to accept her offer, for being desperate enough to step into this house knowing I was nothing more than a bargain. His voice came firm, resolute. "I do not hate you. I hate her for doing this to you. I hate myself for not seeing it sooner. But not you, never you." The conviction in his tone, cracked something inside her, a dam she had built for years to contain the belief that she was unworthy of being chosen for herself. Her sobs broke free, raw and unrestrained, and Ethan did not try to stop them. He did not offer platitudes or promises he could not keep. He simply sat with her, the firelight flickering across their faces, their silence filled with an understanding that words could never carry. Hours blurred. She told him about her father, about the man who had once been her anchor. Before illness hollowed him into a shell, she spoke of bills piling high, of collectors pounding on the door of her mother gone too soon, and the crushing weight of being the only one left to carry the family's survival. Her voice cracked as she admitted, "I kept thinking, if I broke myself enough, maybe I could put him back together." Ethan listened, his eyes never leaving her, every word carving deeper into his chest. When she faltered, he spoke softly, confessing how he had watched his father fade beneath boardroom wars, how Veronica had stripped him of innocence before he had a chance to cling to it, how power had been a cage disguised as inheritance. The parallels became undeniable. Two souls from different worlds bound by wounds, inflicted by those who should have protected them. The night deepened. Rain began to fall soft against the glass, a rhythm that soothed the raw edges of their confessions. Anna leaned her head back against the window frame, her eyes swollen but steadier. "You make it sound as if pain is the only thing that defines us," she whispered. Ethan's voice was low, almost tender. "Pain shapes us, but it does not own us. It only owns us if we let it." For the first time in years, Anna allowed herself to believe in that possibility. The fire burned lower, its glow softening the sharp lines of Ethan's face, making him appear younger, almost vulnerable. He leaned back, his gaze still on her. "You are stronger than you think, Anna, stronger than she knows." She gave a humorless laugh, shaking her head. "Strong does not mean anything when you are being auctioned off like property." His reply was immediate. "It means everything when you refuse to let them break you." She looked at him, then truly looked, and what she saw in his eyes was not pity, but recognition, a mirror of her own scars. The silence that followed was not heavy, but fragile, delicate, like the first thaw after a brutal winter. It was the beginning of something neither could yet name, but both could feel. The following days unfolded with a deceptive calm, the mansion cloaked in quiet routines that almost convinced Anna she could breathe again, almost convinced Ethan that he had pushed back his mother's cruelty enough to create a fragile peace. They shared breakfasts where the silence was not hostile but tentative, afternoons, where Anna wandered the gardens and Ethan watched from a distance, evenings where the fire became their only companion, and words slipped out in fragments, not yet love, not yet safety, but something neither had known in years. And then the world shattered. It began with whispers in the morning, the staff moving uneasily, glances exchanged but not explained, until Ethan opened his tablet and saw the headline splashed across every tabloid site, a headline that turned his stomach cold. "Billionaire recluse shelters mystery woman. Who is the poor girl in Cross Manor?" The article was vicious, painting Anna as a mistress purchased to soothe Ethan's loneliness, a transactional companion draped in borrowed silk. Blurry photos accompanied the text. Anna, stepping out of the mansion in her simple dress, her expression nervous, her hair catching the light, in a way that made her seem both beautiful and vulnerable. To the hungry public, it was a feast. To Anna, it was a knife. She found Ethan in the study, the tablet clenched in his hands, his face thunderous. She read over his shoulder, her breath catching as the cruel words carved her to pieces. Cheap, desperate, bought. Each line erased her humanity, reducing her to a caricature of scandal. She stumbled back, her chest heaving, her mind racing. "I did not tell anyone," she whispered, voice cracking. "I swear I did not tell a soul." Ethan dropped the tablet onto the desk, his eyes fierce as he turned to her. "I know, I believe you." But his conviction did little to quiet the storm rising inside her. The gossip, the images, the narrative, none of it cared for truth. Once the world decided what you were, it never let you be anything else. Hours later, another headline appeared, even crueler. "Poor girl, rich man's pawn." Sources say deal arranged by Veronica Cross. The name made Anna's blood run cold. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with horror. It was her. She did this. Ethan's jaw tightened, the truth undeniable. His mother had planted the story, orchestrated the exposure, to corner them, to make Anna so humiliated she would flee, leaving Ethan isolated once again. Anna's hands shook as she clutched the edges of the desk, her breath ragged. "I cannot stay here. I cannot survive this." He moved toward her, his voice low but urgent. "You can. We will face this together." She shook her head violently, tears spilling. "You do not understand. I have lived my whole life being judged for what I lacked. Money, status, worth. But this is worse. The world is laughing at me, calling me a parasite, a whore. I cannot breathe under that." Her voice cracked into a sob. "I cannot be a deal between you and your mother." Ethan's chest clenched, as if the words were barbed wire. He reached for her, his hands desperate to anchor her, but she pulled away, shaking as though his touch might burn. "I thought I could endure anything if it meant saving my father, but this shame, this spotlight, I cannot bear it." He tried again, his voice breaking for the first time. "Anna, listen to me. You are not their story. You are not her pawn. You are not my mother's arrangement. You are yours." His words should have soothed, but the noise of the headlines drowned them out. She backed toward the door, her body trembling, her eyes filled with pain. "I have to leave before this destroys me completely. Before it destroys you." Ethan's breath caught panic, clawing at him. "Do not go. Not like this." He moved forward, blocking her path, his eyes pleading. "You are not just someone I took in. You are not just a girl in the headlines. You are the reason this place feels alive again. You are the reason I can breathe." But she shook her head, her voice soft but firm, the resignation in it heavier than any scream. "You may see that, Ethan, but the world does not. And I cannot fight the world." He froze the fire between them, burning down to embers of helplessness. She slipped past him, her footsteps echoing down the hall, each one like a fracture in his chest. By the time he reached the front door, she was gone, the night swallowing her figure as though she had never existed. He stood there alone in the vast silence, the humiliation of her absence heavier than any scandal. For Anna, the breaking point was not his mother's cruelty or the debts she carried. It was the realization that love, fragile and unspoken, could not shield her from the brutality of exposure. And for Ethan, the breaking point was knowing he had finally found someone who saw him beyond the empire, beyond the steel, and still he was losing her. The mansion that once seemed invincible was trembling with tension as the family council gathered, summoned under the guise of a routine board meeting. But everyone knew something heavier hung in the air. The grand dining hall had been converted into a chamber of authority mahogany table, stretching beneath chandeliers that glittered coldly portraits of past cross-patriarchs gazing down like silent judges. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his broad shoulders stiff beneath the weight of expectation, his jaw-clenched eyes burning with restrained fire. Around him, uncles, aunts, and board members whispered in hushed tones, their curiosity piqued by the scandal splashed across every tabloid. But the storm's eye was not him. It was Anna who stood near the far end of the hall. Pale, trembling, a figure of fragile defiance, in a simple dress that did not belong in such a room of power. Veronica entered with the grandeur of a queen, her presence commanding immediate silence. Draped in deep emerald silk diamonds at her throat, she looked every inch the matriarch. Her smile poised, her eyes sharp as glass. She took her place opposite Ethan, her voice cutting through the murmurs with perfect precision. Before we begin the agenda, I believe we must address the distraction my son has brought into this house. Her hand lifted slightly, gesturing toward Anna, as though she were an object on display. Whispers surged, heads turned, gazes slicing into the girl who wished only to vanish into the floor. Anna gripped the edge of a chair to steady herself, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the entire room could hear. Ethan's voice broke the noise, low but unyielding. "Enough. You will not reduce her to a distraction." Veronica's smile widened, cold and amused. What else should I call her? The world already knows her as the poor girl who sold herself into our family. Shall we pretend otherwise? Anna's breath caught in her throat, shame scorching her, but she raised her chin, forcing herself to meet Veronica's gaze. Her voice was small, but it carried. "I never chose this. You brought me here. You offered my desperation a deal I did not want." Veronica's brow arched as laughter rippled softly from her lips. "My dear, no one forced you through those doors. You walked willingly. That is the nature of survival." Ethan slammed his palm against the table, the sound reverberating through the hall, silencing every whisper. "You manipulated her," he growled. "You preyed on her family's suffering." Veronica leaned back unshaken. "And what if I did? It is no different than what your father and I did with every merger, every alliance. People are pawns, Ethan. Power is the only currency worth holding." Anna's tears threatened, but she bit them back, her voice trembling with fury. "I was never his choice. I was your deal." The room fell still, the weight of her confession striking harder than any shouted accusation. For a moment, silence reigned, every eye fixed on the frail girl standing against the empire's matriarch. Ethan rose to his feet, his height casting him like a wall between Anna and the scrutiny. His voice rang out steady, yet laced with fire. "You have controlled my life long enough. You controlled who I loved, who I trusted, and every time I bled for it. But not anymore." Veronica's expression hardened, her smile fading. "Do you truly think you can sever yourself from me, from this legacy? Everything you have is because of me." Ethan shook his head slowly, his voice steady as steel. "Everything I am is in spite of you." Gasps rippled through the council, the audacity of his defiance shocking even those who had long resented Veronica's iron grip. Ethan continued, his eyes locked on his mother's. "I will no longer let you dictate my life. I will no longer be your pawn." And she, his hand gestured toward, "Anna is not yours to break." Veronica's nostrils flared fury, igniting behind her carefully maintained mask. "And what will you do, Ethan? Throw away everything your father built. Walk away from the empire that bears your name. Ethan's gaze was unflinching. If that is the price of freedom, yes. A wave of murmurs crashed across the room. Shock and disbelief mingling with a few nods of quiet admiration. Veronica's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair, her composure cracking. You would betray your bloodline for her. Ethan's reply was calm, devastating. I would save myself for her. Anna's eyes filled her body, shaking at the weight of his words. Never had anyone chosen her over power, over family, over empire. The room buzzed with whispers, the board members exchanging conflicted glances. Some outraged, others quietly emboldened. Veronica's voice lashed like a whip. You are a fool, Ethan. You will burn everything your father gave you. You will crawl back when you realize love does not keep empires standing. Ethan's lips curved in a grim smile. Maybe not empires, but it keeps people standing, and I would rather stand with nothing than kneel with everything. Veronica rose suddenly, her chair scraping back with a violent screech. Her gaze swept the room, daring anyone to defy her. She turned her fury back on Anna, her words venom. You think you are worthy of him. You think you belong here. You are nothing but a debt payment dressed in silk. Anna flinched, the cruelty slicing into her, but before the tears could fall, she lifted her chin. Her voice quivering but fierce. Maybe I am nothing in your world, but I never asked to be here. I never asked for this deal. I only asked to save my father. That does not make me weak. That makes me human. The room stilled again, her fragile strength piercing the air. Even the most hardened faces among the board members faltered their gazes, shifting, some ashamed, some moved. Ethan's chest swelled with pride, his hand lowering gently to rest near Anna's, not quite touching but offering strength. Veronica saw it, her fury deepening, but for the first time she seemed unsure, her power cracking under the weight of defiance, not just from her son, but from the girl she had dismissed as worthless. Ethan turned to the council, his voice firm, authoritative. I am done letting fear and control dictate this family. I will step away from cross-global. I will build something new, something free from manipulation. Anyone who believes in that vision is welcome to stand with me. Veronica gasped, fury blazing, but the room erupted into whispers of possibility. A few members exchanged determined nods, the idea of freedom from Veronica's tyranny igniting something long buried. Ethan straightened his hand, finally brushing Anna's as though sealing his choice with touch. I choose her, not because of a deal, not because of a bargain, but because she is the only truth in this sea of lies. Anna's breath caught her heart racing. The word, simple yet monumental, felt like a shield around her, like light piercing through years of darkness. Veronica's eyes glittered with rage, her lips curling into a final bitter smile. Then you are no son of mine. Ethan's voice came steady, final. Then so be it. The room shook with the gravity of his declaration, the legacy of the Cross Empire splintering in that instant. Veronica turned sharply, her gown swirling as she swept from the room, her diamonds catching one last flash of firelight before vanishing. Silence lingered, heavy, electric. Slowly, Ethan turned to Anna, his expression softer now, his voice breaking through the storm. I will not let her decide who we are, not anymore. Anna's tears spilled freely, but they were not only from pain. They were from something new, relief, astonishment, a flicker of hope. She had thought long extinguished. For the first time, she felt not like a pawn on a board, but like a woman, chosen, defended, seen. The board members slowly rose, some leaving in quiet shock, others pausing to give Ethan curt nods of respect. The empire would fracture, the future uncertain, but in that moment nothing mattered except the two of them standing in the wreckage, bound not by deals or power, but by the fragile beginning of something real. Ethan reached for her hand fully this time, his fingers warm, his grip steady. "Come with me," he whispered, his voice raw, stripped of all armor, "not as part of her world, but as part of mine." Anna nodded through her tears, her heart thundering, her voice barely audible but resolute. "I will." The chandeliers above flickered the portraits of past patriarchs staring down, but for once the weight of history no longer mattered. What mattered was the choice made here in this hall, amidst the ruins of power. A choice of love over empire, of freedom over chains of two broken souls daring to stand together. The corridors of Cross Manor were hushed, and after the storm of the family showdown, the echoes of Veronica's rage still lingering in the marbled walls. Like ghosts that refused to leave, Ethan led Anna through the quiet halls, his hand never letting go of hers, his grip firm yet gentle. A lifeline threading her through the wreckage. They reached the conservatory, a glass-walled room, spilling moonlight across white orchids and dark polished stone. The air scented faintly with jasmine. Anna stopped breathless, her chest heaving as the weight of the evening caught up with her. Her tears threatened again, but this time they were not the tears of shame or despair. They were something she did not yet dare to name. Ethan turned to face her, his tall frame silhouetted against the silver wash of night. His voice was low, roughened by exhaustion, yet filled with something unshakable. "Anna, look at me." She lifted her eyes, hesitant, afraid of what she might see, but his gaze held no pity, no control, only the steady light of choice. He stepped closer, his hands rising to rest lightly on her shoulders, grounding her trembling form. "You never needed to serve me." His words came soft but resolute, each one cutting through the lies that had shackled her. "You just needed to stay." Her lips parted, a broken sound escaping as though those words had unraveled every knot in her soul. She shook her head, struggling against the disbelief that clung to her. "You do not understand. All my life I have been something to be used. By debt collectors, by neighbors who whispered by your mother, who saw me as nothing but leverage. I do not know how to just be." Ethan's thumb brushed along her shoulder, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then let me teach you, not as someone who owns you, not as someone who rescued you, but as a man who sees you, truly sees you." Anna's chest tightened, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might break through her ribs. She whispered, voice trembling, "I do not know if I can believe in that." He leaned in slightly, his forehead nearly touching hers, his breath warm against her skin. "Then let me show you every day until you do." The silence stretched between them, thick with the possibility of something neither had dared to hope for. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed her hand to rise, fingers brushing the edge of his shirt, tentative like a child reaching for light. He caught her hand, gently pressing it against his chest, where his heartbeat thudded strong and unguarded. "Do you feel that, Anna? That is not an empire. That is not a deal. That is me, and it is yours if you want it." Her tears spilled freely, then hot against her cheeks as she whispered back, "I am so afraid." He smiled faintly, his voice tender. "So am I. That is how we know it is real." She let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half release, and for the first time in her life, the fear of belonging to someone felt less like a cage and more like a possibility of home. Ethan lowered his hands to hers, holding them tightly, his eyes searching her face with a vulnerability that few had ever seen. "I do not care what the world calls you. I do not care what my mother thinks. You are not a pawn. You are not a scandal. You are the woman who walked into my life and forced me to feel again." Anna's breath caught the words sinking into her like warmth, seeping into frozen skin. She whispered, voice cracking, "And what if I fail you? What if I cannot carry the weight of being by your side?" His reply came without hesitation. "Then we fail together, and we stand again together." Her knees buckled with the force of his conviction, and instinctively he pulled her into his chest, his arms wrapping around her tightly, fiercely, as though daring the world to try to take her again. For a long moment, she simply stood there pressed against the steady beat of his heart, her tears soaking into his shirt, her body trembling not from fear but from release. When she finally drew back, his hand lingered against her cheek, his thumb brushing the dampness away. His eyes soft yet blazing with emotion. He bent his head slightly, not yet closing the space between them, giving her the choice. She inhaled, exhaled, then lifted herself just enough for their foreheads to touch. Not a kiss, not yet, but something more sacred. A vow unspoken. She whispered, almost inaudible, "I want to stay." His smile broke then small, but radiant, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. "Then stay." And with that, the fracture in her chest began to mend piece by fragile piece. They stood together under the silver moonlight, the orchids bearing silent witness, the empire behind them crumbling the future ahead, uncertain, but in that moment, the only truth that mattered was the choice they had made. The choice of love over power, of freedom over chains of two broken souls, daring to believe they were worthy of healing. For Anna, it was the first time she was not a daughter bargaining for her father's life, not a girl traded by desperation, not a pawn in someone else's empire. She was simply a woman, chosen, wanted, seen. For Ethan, it was the first time he had not been a son living under the shadow of his mother's control, not a billionaire defined by empires or legacies, but simply a man standing before the one person who made him feel alive. And as dawn crept slowly over the horizon, touching the glass walls of the conservatory with hues of rose and gold, they knew without speaking that the choice they had made tonight would redefine everything. It was not yet love, not yet salvation, but it was something stronger than both. It was the beginning of freedom together. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Ethan's estate, casting long golden beams across the marble floors, warming the rooms that had long been cloaked in shadows. Anna stood on the porch that only nights ago had felt like a prison. Her hands wrapped around a simple porcelain cup of tea, steam curling upward like a fragile promise. She breathed deeply, the cool air crisp against her cheeks, and for the first time in years, she felt the quiet did not suffocate her. Behind her, Ethan stepped out his footsteps, steady the weight of the previous night, still heavy on his shoulders, but softened by the presence of the woman beside him. He looked at her not with ownership or expectation, but with reverence, as if she were the answer to a question he had carried too long. She glanced at him shyly, still unaccustomed to being seen without judgment, and offered a small smile that seemed to light more than the horizon. He moved closer, standing beside her, their shoulders brushing lightly, the silence between them no longer empty but alive. From the valley below, the world stirred. Newspapers would scream. Scandal investors would speculate. Veronica would plot her next move. But up here on the ridge, none of it mattered. What mattered was the fragile truth blooming between them. Anna set down her cup, her bare feet touching the wooden boards of the porch. For a moment she closed her eyes and remembered the night of the gala, the tango she had danced out of desperation, the way the music had made her body move with something like defiance. She turned to Ethan, her lips parting with nervous laughter. "I never thought I would say this again, but dance with me." His brow arched a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Now." She nodded, her hair falling loose around her face, her cheeks flushed with something close to joy. No music played, only the whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant call of a bird. But Anna stepped forward, placing her hand against his chest, guiding him gently. Ethan, awkward at first, followed his large frame, moving with surprising grace, as she led him through a slow echo of the tango that had once caught his attention. They moved across the porch, the morning sun, painting them in soft light, their bodies swaying not for performance or spectacle, but for themselves. Anna's laughter spilled freely unguarded, and Ethan's smile widened the years of stone, in his heart crumbling with each step. He twirled her clumsily, and she laughed louder, her head falling back. The sound like music he had never heard before. In that dance, there was no empire, no scandal, no deal. There was only the purity of two people daring to choose joy after so much pain. When they stopped breathless, she leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, and whispered, "I used to dream of someone saying yes to me. Not because they had to, not because of a deal, but because they wanted to." He tilted her chin gently, his eyes steady, his voice low. "I said yes the moment you walked into my life, and I will keep saying it every day." Her tears glistened not of sorrow but release, and she pressed her lips softly to his cheek, a kiss that carried more promise than any vow. Later that week, Ethan did not stand before cameras or crowds. There was no grand declaration to the world, no performance for tabloids. Instead, he and Anna went quietly to the courthouse in town. No photographers followed, no headlines screamed. Just a man and a woman signing papers that meant little to empires, but everything to hearts. They walked out hand in hand, the autumn air crisp, their eyes shining with something unspoken. No rings, no staged ceremony, but a choice sealed in the silence of their clasped hands. Back at the manor, Ethan showed Anna the sketches he had drawn, late at night, designs for a new house, not on the ridge, but closer to town, something smaller, warmer, with wide porches and open doors. Anna added her own lines, her pencil strokes delicate, but certain sketching gardens and corners for laughter spaces. For others like her, who had knocked on doors and been turned away. Together they imagined a place that was not fortress or empire but sanctuary. Weeks passed and the scandal headlines faded into the next story, the world hungry for fresher prey. Veronica's fury lingered. Her control fractured, but Ethan no longer bent beneath it. He built something new, not just in business, but in life, brick by brick, day by day. And Anna, for the first time, stopped running. She stopped looking for exits in every room, stopped bracing for cruelty in every silence. She learned to wake with peace and to sleep without fear. One evening, as the firelight danced across the room, Anna found the sketch she had once drawn the cabin with 2 chairs on the porch. The words scribbled underneath where someone said yes. She handed it to Ethan, her eyes shimmering. "Do you remember this?" He smiled, tracing the lines with his finger. "Of course. You wrote those words before I ever said them." She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "I think I was asking for something I did not believe existed, but you made it real." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his voice steady. "You were never a deal. You were never a pawn. You were the answer I did not know I was waiting for." And as their foreheads touched again this time, not with hesitation but certainty, the house seemed to exhale the silence, filling with warmth, the future expanding beyond every wound of the past. Months later, on a quiet morning, Anna stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sun climb over the valley. She held her sketchbook in one hand, her other resting gently on her stomach, where new life stirred, fragile and miraculous. Ethan stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting against her shoulder. Together they watched the sunrise, the world before them, vast, uncertain, but theirs. The porch that had once symbolized a prison had become a beginning. The girl who had whispered an offer of servitude now stood beside the man who had chosen her not as a bargain, but as his heart. And the billionaire, who had once been shackled by power and legacy, was now simply a man, free at last because he dared to love. The camera of imagination would pull back then, capturing them in slow motion. Against the golden sky, 2 figures on a porch, built not from deals or control, but from choice. A voice would echo, not theirs, but the story's itself. Sometimes the cruelest deal becomes the beginning of the purest love.